Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm so glad that you're here. Today we're going to do a project that I really think is going to be a lot of fun. It's very simple. It might look like it's more challenging, but it totally isn't, okay? This is creating a mystery memory window. And that is taking some moment in your history, a precious moment, or some moment that was really meaningful to you, and capturing it on a canvas. And it's something that really, you're the only one who's going to understand it unless you explain it to others, okay? And so it's kind of a deep concept, but it's easy to do. And my intention is to be loose and kind of free, because it's more about the meaning behind it than how precise you are in creating it. So just let yourself flow, which makes it a lot easier and really enjoyable because you're painting with your emotions, not just from how you've learned to create. This project takes a little bit of time and really can have a lot of meaning. Let's get started by going over some of the supplies that you'll need. First, you're going to need paint of some kind, crafter's paint, tube, acrylic, whatever it is that you like to use. You're going to need brushes, a stencil brush or a sponge, something to apply the paint with. And you're going to need some low-tack tape and your surface. And if you're using acrylic, a canvas would be a good idea. And finally, you're going to need a variety of stencils. Okay, I'm going to talk about this concept and how to go forward with it while I'm painting the background image. I'm so excited about this project, and I hope you are too. So let's go ahead and get this started. Here we have the definition of abstract art. Art that does not attempt to represent external reality, but seeks to achieve its effect using shapes, forms, colors, and textures. So we're going to apply that sort of, okay? However, what we're going to be using for this part of it are stencils. So in a sense, depending on what the stencil is, it might be recognizable. It might be more on the representational side. However, even if somebody recognizes it, they're not going to understand, unless you make it readily apparent, what you are trying to show in your piece. Now, I'm going to describe mine in just a minute, to give you a good idea, okay? Now, let's go on to representational art. It's art that depicts something easily recognized by most people. And so this can be a mix of both. But now look at the image. You're going to see the dark brown outlines. And that is supposed to represent the wood that is surrounding those 9 window panes. Now, those 9 panes, what they are is a moment or a memory, something like that. It could be really anything you want. I have chosen a memory from my childhood. What I've done is taken the stencils and just used like little snippets of them to put in these 9 windows. And so if somebody looks at this piece, they're going to see some maybe, interesting artwork or interesting stencil work, but they're not going to know the meaning behind it. So on this particular piece, this is a memory that I have from my childhood, which is extremely precious to me. It was in my grandmother's backyard. It was covered in these beautiful trees that had these low-hanging branches, flowers everywhere, butterflies, birds, and it had a bench. And when I would walk into that area, I felt like a little fairy princess. And so for me, it is one of the most precious memories I have of my childhood. But now, if you look at this image, you won't see that at all, right? It might look like a leaf, might look kind of like a flower, but you're not going to be able to piece what the moment is together in that. unless, of course, I were to tell somebody, right? So that's what this is all about, is creating something really meaningful to you, but that only you know unless you share it. So to me, that's the mystery fun part. And you don't have to use stencils. You could use stamps, anything that you want. But the point of this is to try to use something that is not totally representational, okay? And if it is, like, say, the leaf I mentioned a minute ago, the viewers are not going to understand the concept unless you explain it, okay? And the next part is the color palette I chose. I deliberately chose all of the beiges and browns because I wanted it to look more like an antique. And there is reason for that, and that's because this particular memory did happen many, many years ago. And so I wanted it to have that antique feeling to it. But you can use any colors you like, whatever feels right to you. Part of me was tempted to do it in pinks and yellows and greens, to bring out the vibrant moment. But I wanted to give a clue of it being something that took place quite some time ago. I hope this makes sense, by the way. Now, creating this piece actually doesn't take very long. You have to wait for each of the 9 sections to dry, but doing the artwork itself does not take long at all, especially if you're using stencils or stamps, okay? All right. And now make for sure that if you do not want to use a frame, that you paint the sides of your canvas as well. Okay, now that our canvas is all dry, let's go ahead and get the fun part started. As you can see, I've decided to go ahead and start with the center section. And what we're going to want to do is take our low-tack tape and tape off around the outside of that section so all of our paint stays within that center block. And it's kind of important to note that there is no need to measure this out. It's supposed to be easy, fun, kind of free. So just kind of guesstimate where you think you should put your tape, all right? No need for perfection here. So as you can tell, we have 9 sections that we need to do. What I'm going to do is go over the first section normal speed. And after that, I will go through the other 8 sections quickly, but continue to talk to you about them as we go along. And I might even add a little music, okay? And here's another tip. Get yourself a little mister bottle and keep it with you. And every once in a while, spray the paint that you have on your palette, or in my case, my disposable plate, because the acrylic will dry out, and if you missed it, it will help it to stay moist longer. Okay? Just a great thing to do. Saves a lot of effort down the road. Okay, we're ready. Get out your stencil of choice and lay it over the area that you have taped off, and find an area of that stencil that you like, that you feel like represents what it is you're wanting to do. And another tip here, if you have something that's centered, it is going to give the impression of being either stagnant or very relaxed. If you want to add a little excitement, don't put it in the center, okay? Put it off center. And now talking a bit more about placement. If you decide to put it off towards the corner, don't have it perfectly in the corner. I have a video where I talk about the rule of thirds, and that includes this, centering or putting something off to the side, etc. So I will put a link to that at the end of this video, and you might take a look at it because that might help you with this. Okay, I'm getting a little bit academic here. Let's just head on back to what we were talking about. So now it is time to apply the paint. we have our canvas taped down, our stencil in place, so we need to apply the paint to the stencil. You can use a stencil brush, a little dauber, which is what I'm using, a paintbrush, anything you want to use, because different things will give different effects. So you might play around with that a little and see what works best for you. And since our project is going to have multiple layers, it's really not that important for you to be extra precise in getting everything perfect when it comes to applying your paint to the stencil. In other words, you don't have to get every little bit all the way up to the edge. You can if you like, but there's not any need, because we're going to go over it with a few more layers, which, might very well cover some of that area anyway. I deliberately picked out stencils that were too big because I just wanted to pick a section that had meaning to me. An example would be, if you look at it, you'll see what looks kind of like a flower. But if the section was bigger, you would see that it was a flower. And I was trying to stay away from something like that for the most part. Now, please feel free. You can do that if you like. But I was trying to lean it a little bit more towards the abstract side. Okay, back we go. Ta-da! Let's take off the stencil and see how it looks. I'm excited. It's kind of like the big reveal. Okay, here we go. Oh, I really do like that. Okay, so now that we're done with the center section, you have a couple of choices. You can either wait for your paint to dry and then take off the tape, or vice versa. But in the end, you do need to wait for whatever you've just painted to dry before you go on to the next part or the next section. And just to mention, the slow tack tape that I'm using is really pretty tacky. So that's okay, but it reminded me of when I was in art school. Something we used to do if we didn't have any low tack tape and we needed some, you can just get regular like Scotch tape and dab it on your clothes, your jeans, your shirt, anything like that, because it'll pick up little pieces of the threads. And if you do that a few times, it ends up turning it into kind of like a low tack tape. So if you don't have any low tack tape at home, but you have Scotch tape, you could use that. One more quick thing to mention is that while you wait for your paint to dry, consider putting saran wrap or press and seal over your palette or your disposable plate, whatever it is where your paint is, because that will also help to keep it moist so it won't dry out on you. Okay, everybody, we're now ready to move on to the hyperspeed of the video, because the next 8 are going to be repetitive of the one that we just went through, okay? While we're going through these next 8 sections, I am going to put on some music for you, okay? I hope you enjoy it. But I'm also going to be talking a little bit as well. When you do the other 8, on some of those, try to change the color a little bit. That will add more interest, as well as showing that it is a different part, a different section, a different meaning, something different. And it doesn't have to be a drastic change. It can be. It's totally up to you. And using different parts of stencils within the same section, within the same window pane. I'm doing that on a few of these because it just seemed to balance out better for me. And that is something that you might consider doing as well. Another thing is to try to alternate the images when it comes to, say, like how sparse, how dense, the negative space, things like that, so you don't have a bunch of complex or intricate sections together. An example would be the bottom 4 left are really intricate, and all around it are, say, bigger images that are a lot more sparse, that have a lot more negative space. That's going to look kind of bottom left heavy. So it's a lot better if you mix them up. The intricate ones with the ones that have a lot more negative space, and it will look much more balanced. And the contrast of doing something like that is very good. It's pleasing for the eye. To sum up, 2 parts of this that to me make a big difference are, 1, the color choice. If you're doing something a little more monochromatic like me, you still want to alternate the colors some. That will add interest. And the other is which stencils you put where. You want to make for sure you distribute them in a way that looks balanced. So when you do both of those things, you end up with a very interesting and fulfilling visual. All right, we made it through the first part where we're putting on the stencils. Okay, we're ready for part 2, and this is finishing the design itself. The first 2 images are pointing out what the stencils look like on the canvas, and then the second one is just showing you a couple of easy to spot sections that need some more elements put in. You can see in the center on the left side there's a big negative space, and in the top right corner there's a big negative space. And there are other areas within the image itself that need some dots, some little shapes put in, and these can all be free-handed quickly, but will bring a lot of balance and interest to the image if you take the time to do that. The top right corner looks like it needs something. It looks like the negative space is just too much. I'm gonna paint that corner. So what we're gonna do is go back in and through each section and add simple designs, mostly dots, different sized dots. Fill in any areas that you feel like are too sparse, too much negative space showing through. And by doing this, you'll be creating balance. So the image will look more like a whole image instead of, pieces put together. I hope that made sense. And it's always a good idea to use some sort of different color, potentially a contrasting color, because they will show up much better. And use different size dots. Easiest way to make dots, you could take the back of your brush and use that as a dot maker. The dauber brushes, they make good dots. Even if you want a teeny tiny dot, you can use a toothpick. So anything that you find that creates dots will work here, okay? Now, one thing I wanted to mention, on the piece that I am creating, I'm not using contrasting colors. I am using different colors. Where it's dark, I might putting something light, but at least it is a different color so I can have the contrast. But that is only because I'm using something that is close to, I guess you could say, monochromatic-ish. They're all beiges, browns, tans, things like that. But if your palette is just full of color, then do use complementary or contrasting colors. Now we are on to part 3. To distress or not to distress. It's totally up to you. And what I have done is I've what some people call pickled it, or put a light coat in areas to give it more of a distressed kind of look. But if you don't want to do that, you could stop where you are and it would be a complete picture. However, if you choose to stop, then I would definitely do something with the lines along each section, those black lines. I would go through there and define those in some way. Okay, and if that's where you'd like to leave it, awesome. But if you'd like to go on and find out about distressing it a bit more, then part 3 is for you. Let's quickly talk about the supplies that you will need. You're going to need some way to apply paint. And this is a fun place to do some experimenting. Like, I have a stipple brush that's got pretty stiff bristles. That could be a good way. I took an old washcloth and cut it up because it's made out of that terry cloth, so it adds interesting texture. And I have a natural sponge. So depending on where I'm daubing it onto the surface, the sponge itself, it's going to give me varying textures. And also, with any of these, or anything you choose, you can daub or you can lay it down on the canvas and then pull towards you a little bit. There are many ways to apply this next layer of paint. Now, one thing you don't want to do too much of is make it solid. Maybe a little solid here and there is fine, but you want some transparency through most of it, or at least some of it. I guess it all depends on what you'd like, okay? Now, a key point here is to understand that when I'm talking about putting a light color on top, I am not referring to a glaze that covers everything, that just lightens the whole thing up. I'm talking about specific areas, even if it's kind of random, some areas covered, some not, to give it more of that distress sort of look. One other thing I should probably mention is if you go ahead and do this and don't like it, if your paint is still wet or almost wet, just dried, you could probably take a wet washcloth, if this is acrylic, and either wipe it all off or wipe most of it off. However, it is possible that you won't be able to. It depends on how long it's been on your surface. So if you're in doubt, either try it on, say, a piece of printer paper and see what you think, or you could try a small area on the canvas itself and just make for sure that you have a wet washcloth close at hand to wipe it off if you don't like it. Okay, moving on. Now, what you're going to see is where I have done this process and I've used the washcloth and the sponge. I also show how to just daub to get the lighter color and also how to kind of pull it towards you. And then I am going to just fast forward through the rest of it. But you could stop the video at any time to get a closer view. Also, I thought I should mention that while I'm doing this light on dark technique, you can do a dark on light technique. It all depends on what colors you're using. So you could test that out as well to see which looks better. And the dark technique, a lot of people refer to as antiquing. Whichever you use, it adds another layer of interest to your image. And it also kind of distresses it a little bit more, which adds a variation in color, interest, texture. So it is something to take a look at because it could really enhance your piece, but not always. So you really have to be discerning here. To sum this up, all you need to do is pick a color or colors to apply in smaller daubs or swipes to add interest. I hope you've been having fun so far. I know I have. I'm really enjoying the process of seeing how something transforms as I add the layers. We are going to make the wood part of the windows. And I guess those are called grills. I didn't know that till I looked it up. But yep, that's what they're called. And it's very simple. All we need to do is go along those black lines that we created initially with whatever color or colors you'd like to use. And I am trying to, of course, keep mine simple and antique looking, so I'm just going to make them in browns. Now you use whatever color strikes your fancy. I'm starting out with kind of an orange color, and just to let you know, as I was doing this, I realized that this mix of orange and sienna was coming out looking rustic instead of more like an antique, and so it was starting to go down a different way than I wanted. But I went ahead and kept it there to use as a transitional type of color into the window grills. Did that make sense? I hope. Okay, so you can see where I'm putting this orangish color on there, and I'm keeping it kind of transparent. Now, once this is done, I'm going to go back in and do it with a burnt umber, a really dark brown. And one thing that I discovered, and remember this to me, a lot of it's about having fun and discovering, is that having that bottom layer of the wood for the windows in a semi-transparent way really added quite a bit of interest. So it's something to consider. You don't have to, but I found out that even though at first I thought I didn't like it, I really did like it. This can be what happens when you take chances and experiment. Sometimes you come up with something that just works out so well. We're almost finished with this project. I am continuing to paint using burnt umber, just layering one coat on top of another until I reach what I consider done. Something I wanted to mention, there is no need for perfection here. As a matter of fact, it's been my goal to try to be loose and free, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video. You know, if we wanted a hard-edged line, we would tape it off with the low-tack tape and just swipe over it with a brush. But adding that human factor, you know, being kind of loose and lines not being perfectly straight is a goal that I'm after here. So consider doing that. You could do it either way, but having that human factor to me adds a lot to the image. And so there you have it. It's all done. Unless, of course, you want to take it a little bit further. And I think I will. I really enjoyed spending my time with you. It's been quite an experience, you know, putting our emotions on a canvas that only we know about unless we want to share. A little self-exploration maybe, and some unconventional use of supplies like the stencils and concepts. So I hope you learned a few things, but mostly I hope you had a lot of fun. Post video here. If you look at the image, you're going to see where I've increased the size of the grills and darkened them up. And the reason for that is I plan on continuing to do more to this image. Probably adding, I don't know, maybe some beads, wire to the grill section, and maybe some dangles, maybe just dressing it some more. And I will record that, and if it turns out that it might be something that I think you're interested in, I will post a part 2 of this video. And if you take it further, I would love to know in the comments. So thanks so much for spending time with me, and have a beautiful day. Much love. Bye.